Hello, welcome to my SLOconf 2023 talk. I'm Fred Moyer, and today I'm going to be talking about the body's error budget, which is about SLOs for healthy eating. I'm Fred Moyer on the Twitter and Hackaderm and other places that one can find handles nowadays. I'm excited to do this talk. This one's a bit unconventional for me, but it's a story about how I was able to use SLOs in my daily life to accomplish a personal goal. So let's get into it. So hey, I'm Fred. I'm a slogician. It's kind of like a statistician. In my work, I deal a lot with SLIs and SLOs and error budgets. You may have seen me in some other talks talking about time series databases and histograms in particular. Been doing the software engineering thing for quite a while now, and I've got 2 young kids, so if you see me out there tired, give me coffee or give me a nap. And as part of kind of my what I like to do in my spare time, I like to ride my bike, and I used to ride about 10,000 kilometers per year before I had kids. And as folks with children know, things change, and so I'm going to tell the story about how things changed for me and how I ended up using SLOs in a way that I never expected to. So first, a couple disclaimers, several disclaimers actually. I'm an engineer, a software engineer, not a doctor. And I'm an engineer, not a biochemist. There will be a little bit of biochemistry in this talk, but if you want the in-depth details, go talk to an actual biochemist or read up on it. And this is a talk about my experiences. This is not a prescription that you can take and go and do yourself. And also, this is a personal talk. The opinions in here are my own, not my current, present, past, or future employers. And this is a talk about applying nutrition science. It's not something I consider to be about self-image or food. I know in today's culture that can have, trigger points for some folks. So where possible, I've tried to just stick to the science. And finally, before applying any SLOs to what you're eating or your health, go talk to a physician or medical professional, preferably someone who's been to medical school. Don't listen to just some guy off the internet, which in this case happens to be me. But those are the disclaimers. So I used to ride my bike a lot, and I was in a road cycling club called Mission Cycling here in San Francisco. And I did 2012. I did this one ride called the Davis Double Century. My aunt had done it 13 times, so I thought, oh, how hard can it be? And it's a 200-mile bike ride. Turns out it's pretty hard. This attempt took me 13 hours to finish. I think maybe 5 in the morning to 9 p.m. at night. And it took me 3 attempts. The first time I got kind of sick from not eating enough salt. But this was a big deal for me to do. And, this was part of my social routine. I'd go out on the weekends and ride with folks. And this was just a blast. You can see elapsed time, 16 hours. But also in there, you'll see I burned about 7,700 calories on this ride. And I'll get back to that part in a second. But then I did some other interesting rides. Here in San Francisco, we have a cycling track in Golden Gate Park known as the Polo Fields. And we'd have local races there. And one day I decided, you know what? I'm going to go out and see how many times I can ride around this thing. It's a 1 kilometer track, so about half a mile. And I set out and I started at 6:30 in the morning in the last day of June, about 10 years ago. And I rode my bike around there all day until 6 p.m. and I ended up doing about 279 laps. And throughout the day, I was posting on Instagram and folks in my cycling club would say like, this guy's nuts. And they'd come down there and, hand me, either a gel or some cookies to keep going. But that was a lot of fun. This one in particular, what did I do? I did about 6,000 calories on this ride. And why, what is it with cyclists going and doing all, these crazy rides like this? Because at the end of the ride, you get to go have a huge calzone and a beer and just hang out with friends. It's really a great social thing, and that was a lot of fun to do. And over the years, the club has kind of wound down as people have settled down more. But this was really the goal: being social and going to eat lots of food and enjoy libations after. However, after I got married and had two wonderful kids, I wasn't riding as much of a road bike anymore as I was a cargo bike, as you can see here. And that's also fun, but it's a different kind of experience. You're not out, with a dozen of your best friends going 20 miles an hour for 8 hours and then coming back to the park to have as many burritos as you can chow down. But also as a result, I found myself sitting more in a seat that looks like this. I'm sure everyone here knows what this thing is, Herman Miller Aeron. And this is not a bike seat, obviously. This is actually an economic indicator. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look up Herman Miller Aeron on Craigslist, you can get an idea of how the economy is by how many of these listed and what the price is. So anyway, I ended up spending a considerable amount of time in this seat instead of on the bike. And as part of that, a little bit less activity, and I started to have some service reliability concerns. I'm spending all my time, in here in front of the computer, less time out there getting on the bike. And then one year I go into a checkup with my doctor, and she says, we did your lab tests, nothing concerning right now, but your numbers are starting to creep up a little bit. And so you're effectively, burning some of your health error budget in this. And she said, well, it'd be, you're okay now, but, we want to keep in mind, keep you healthy in the long term. So 5-10 years from now, you're not having to take a bunch of pills and stuff like that. And she said, I know a few years ago, your numbers were better when you're riding the bike. Do you think you can go, kind of drop your body mass down a little bit and those numbers will come back? And I'm like, yeah, that's no problem. I can go ahead and do that. I know how to ride a bike. And so that led me to riding this kind of stationary bike in my garage, which is a lot more effective than being able to go away for an entire day on the weekend and being away from my family. And so I set some SLOs. I defined an SLI and set some SLOs. And I wanted to drop about 20 pounds to get back to good lab numbers. And so I figured, well, okay, let's do some math here. There's 3,500 calories in a pound. 1 hour on this thing is you burn about 500 calories. And if I can do that 7 times a week over 20 weeks, I'm right there. Oops. And I set an SLI of doing 1 hour of exercise every day on the bike to get there, and I wanted to meet that SLI for about 140 days. And it really came down to simple math. This obviously should be quite easy. And to monitor how well I was meeting my SLO, I had one of these smart scales. This one's by Garmin. It syncs with your phone and gives you a nice graph and stuff like that. And so this is an SLO tip. Use good instrumentation. And this is something I talk about in all of my talks. Instrumentation is everything because SLOs are customer facing. And if you don't have your systems instrumented, you can't really know what your customers are seeing. And you want to get instrumentation that is precise and accurate, because if you're going to spend a lot of time using engineering effort, or in this case, dedicating hours of your day to something, you want to make sure that you're tracking it accurately, and then the numbers that you're seeing reflect what's actually going on. Because as I'll show a little bit later, errors can creep in. And so I also had logs for each one of these, each one of the workouts I did. I wrote it in a log book. And as you can see here, I've got some numbers in here. Like there's very first workout on April 15th over there on the left. I labeled it number 1. And I didn't quite meet my SLI of getting one session in every day. I had some strength workouts in here too. But as you can see, I plodded on through this, and my goal was to get to something like around, get up to number 140. And over the rest of the year, I worked at that. And towards the end of the year, I took a look at where I was 9 months later, drum roll, and I did not meet my SLO. As you can see here, this is an output from the Garmin index scale tracking my weight. And I expected that number to just go down because obviously, you burn a certain amount of energy each day, which leaves your body in the form of CO2. Your body mass will change, and hope there that my numbers would get better. But as you can see, it started flat for a while. And then, oh, look, it actually did go down from June until August. And I tried to figure out, well, what happened there? My kids were out of school for the summer. And I don't know if that was a little bit more activity or if something else was going on. But, when I got to the end of the year, I kind of looked back and evaluated this approach, and I decided, well, that didn't work. I didn't meet my SLO. And it was at this point when I said to myself, you know what, this is really important because I am someone who wants to grow old and see my kids grow up and be able to actively participate in that. And that started to put kind of an existential fear into me. And if any folks out there, I don't know if you follow, there's a coach on Twitter and in the interwebs called Julie Gerner. And she talks about kind of reaching your goals and how there's discipline and there's motivation. Discipline is good, but that's more of a push. Motivation is really a pull-based mechanism, and that can be much more powerful. And fear is the fear of not having a long health span so I could spend a lot of time with my family was extremely motivating. So I regrouped and I said to myself, okay, we tried that one effort, but we didn't hit our target, so let's go back to the drawing board. And I invested in some observability to kind of quantify the state that I was in. And this is me. This is a picture of my body composition taken by, it's called a Dexa scan, which is a dual energy X-ray absorption. It's otherwise known as a bone scan. And this basically does a low dose X-ray over your entire body, moves this arm up and down, takes about 7 minutes, costs about $60. You can get it done in a lot of places. And it gives you a reading on what percent body fat you have, percent muscle mass, how much you weigh, bone density, and tells you where you are in the population. It gives you a breakdown of left-right asymmetry of both fat and muscle groups. It turns out that from a snowboarding injury, I had 1 pound of leg muscle fewer on my left side than my right side. And it also gives you a reading called VAT tissue, which is visceral adipose tissue. And VAT is the fat inside of your belly, which essentially surrounds and is contained within your organs. Think if you ever seen a steak, how it's got the lines of fat running through there, that's fairly equivalent. And that's actually a metabolically active form of tissue that is something that is known to cause, if you have, high lab numbers on something, that is known to be one of the drivers of that. And that's something that, I was able to get a reading of how much exactly of that I had and then set a target on to reduce that. And this helped me kind of, this is considered to be the gold standard for body composition. And my plan was to do one of these now and then apply a new approach and do one at the end to ensure that I actually got the results I wanted. And some folks are concerned about radiation. Dexa scan like this is about it's called 1 to 4 microsieverts. And banana is 0.1. Daily radiation from just home or office is about 2 microsieverts per day. So this is, relatively low. You can do it, a couple times to 4 times a year very safely. So SLO tip, instrument everything. I brought in more instrumentation. I realized what I was doing previously was I was measuring the amount of energy I was expending, but not measuring what I was taking in. And so I went and got myself a kitchen scale to actually weigh everything that I was going to eat. And you might think, well, is that a little obsessive or crazy? That's actually how Lance Armstrong trained for the Tour de France. He weighed everything, and that's become more commonplace. And then I had a Garmin watch to measure my activity. And then I had my Garmin scale. And so I set some SLOs here. I wanted 2,000 kilocalories a day in, which is the same as, I think this is kind of standard amount the U.S. government judges stuff by. And then I wanted to be outputting around 3,000 calories a day. And I multiply that 1,000 calorie delta times 1 week, and that would get me about 2 pounds a week, which means I should be able to hit my goal in 10 weeks. And so I also use this app called Chronometer to track everything that I was weighing and eating. Similar apps out there like MyFitnessPal or Lose It. There's a whole bunch of them out there. This one, I had just, I'd started using it a couple years before intermittently, and I thought, well, this has got pretty high precision, so I'm going to go with it. And it allowed me to essentially set an energy goal and track the amount of macros that I was coming in, and that all adds up to how many calories you're getting in per day. And these bars over here are essentially my SLOs. I wanted to hit a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of carbs, and a certain amount of fat, and a certain amount of overall energy per day. And I wanted to hit that SLO on a daily basis for whatever it was, 10 weeks or something like that. And there's a saying by some famous runner that said, "You can't outrun your fork," which means that, when I kind of came across that, I'm like, oh, well, that's why my first effort, did not work. Because I wasn't measuring, I was only measuring half the picture. I was measuring what was going out, but not what was coming in. And so I started to use the Garmin Connect app to measure how much was going out. And then I take a weekly sum, compare that to kind of what I was intaking with the Chronometer app. And I was hoping for a delta of around 7,000 kilocalories, as I mentioned. And that was what I took and kind of confirmed that I was actually seeing that on the scale as it went down. And I actually got a pretty good match on that. So I knew that my instrumentation, at least in this case, was much better than my previous effort. Now, but there's a couple of gotchas, and those come in the realm of biochemistry. Anyone know what this molecule is here? That's okay. This is a recorded talk. I don't expect you to respond. This is a fructose molecule. And there's a somewhat famous endocrinologist named Dr. Robert Lustig, who basically said not all calories are equal. And there's a video link down here, which is titled Fructose 2.0, where he goes into exquisite detail about why fructose is different. And if you're pulling that in, that's actually doesn't count as regular calories. And I'll give a couple slides here, so prepare for a short biochemistry lesson. So fructose, 100 years ago or so, prior to World War II, humans, or most Americans, were consuming about 16 to 24 grams of fructose per day. Fructose is essentially the sugar naturally found in fruit, but it's in anytime you see added sugar on a nutrition label, fructose is more than likely in there. But around 1977 to 78, Americans started taking in more fructose, up to twice as much. And then in 1994, with the rise of Big Gulp and things like that, fructose is present in soft drinks. People were taking in just a ton of fructose, and as much as 10% of their daily caloric intake, which is quite a bit compared to 100 years ago. And so he gave a breakdown here. So fructose itself is different than glucose, which is a simple sugar. How your body metabolizes glucose is very different from how it metabolizes fructose. And this is a bit of a complicated diagram, but the gist of this is when you eat something like a carb, like a piece of bread, or something that contains a carbohydrate that doesn't have fructose, essentially just glucose or some sort of complex chain, your stomach will break this down into glucose, and then glucose will go into your bloodstream and either get processed by your muscles or your pancreas for insulin. And the key thing here is it'll complete a feedback loop to your brain. telling your brain like, oh, hey, I've had enough to eat. You can stop now. And this is how it's supposed to work. But fructose is a little bit different. Fructose is processed by your liver. What does your liver do? It processes toxins. So fructose is, and this is what Lustig said, it's essentially a toxin. And it goes through this thing called the GLUT5 receptor and goes through this complicated set of biochemical reactions that I'm not going to get into today, but you end up with elevated triglycerides and hyperinsulinemia, which is high blood sugar. And the key thing is, if you see this X right here under the brain, there is no feedback loop. So once you eat fructose, you're not satiated, you keep eating more. And fructose is interesting because this biochemical process is very similar to another compound called ethanol, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So fructose and ethanol are both metabolized by the liver and follow very similar metabolic pathways. And so, these are, these are not normal calories. They'll cause fat to build up, visceral fat to build up, which is what I mentioned before. And so I told myself like, well, I'm gonna set some SLOs for those so that I'm not taking in too much fructose. And so here again, I've got my SLIs. Here's my fructose SLI. I wanted to keep under 15 grams of that per day. And I had one for sucrose also. Sucrose is just a glucose and a fructose stuck together. Your stomach has an enzyme called Sucrase, which basically cleaves those apart. Sucrose is table sugar. So anytime you see a nutrition label that has added sugars, that's what it is. And I told myself, okay, go ahead and stay away from those. And I had some other SLIs in here, like I wanted to keep my oxalates low, just for other health reasons, and I had a number of these. And then Chronometer is nice because it has all these microvitamins too, so I could kind of track like was I eating enough vegetables? Spoiler: it turns out most folks don't eat enough vegetables, so. And if you record them, you'll kind of get an in-depth understanding of that. So I ended up eating quite a few more vegetables, and then some of these other ones too. But essentially I had a tool that I could keep track of my SLOs and SLIs. I ended up setting some SLOs that I monitored every month. I kind of on a monthly average, I wanted to get a certain amount of fat-soluble vitamins. On a weekly basis, I wanted 2,000 calories average, keep the oxalates low. And because some vitamins are water soluble, I wanted to kind of hit my RDA on those every day. And fructose, I wanted to keep it quite low. And so 90 days later, I actually had some success. And because I was monitoring this pretty tightly using a scale to track everything coming in, I could actually see, I could see this in almost daily time, how my weight would tick down maybe like 0.1 pounds or something, but it was definitely visible over a weekly average. And this was really encouraging for me to see, because it kind of gave me some hope that I was actually making progress and getting where I wanted to go. And so at the end of this, which was ended up being about close to a little under 3 months, I said, okay, I've achieved my SLO targets, but I asked myself the question, is the customer happy? Because that's why we have SLOs, right? And in this case, the customer was my doctor when I went for another checkup a year later. And this is where things got interesting. The doctor said, good to see you. And I said, I came in all excited and I had my graphs and I said, hey, I dropped X pounds, Y% body fat, got a Dexa scan at the end, and it showed that I actually did, reduce, the amount of body fat I wanted to. And like, look at this data. And he's like, okay, that's nice. Your labs look good. I was like, yeah, okay. It's not excited as I am, but, he said, your labs look good, but we actually use a calculated risk score. And I thought to myself, I didn't know that. And, it kind of felt like one of those engineering projects where you go and you build something, and one software engineer described it to me as like you get to the end and you realize you climbed the wrong mountain. So I asked myself, well, did I actually all this work that I did, was that for the right purpose? Did I actually achieve the result? And the doctor says, I've got some news for you. And I was like, okay. And he said, great work. You're in the lowest risk category. Go have a donut. You've earned it. And I actually celebrated with a couple of donuts, which was nice. And so that's my journey. One thing I will mention is, at the end, I did reevaluate my SLOs and gave myself, I set a new set of goals to maintain. And that's another lesson with SLOs. Once you're in that transition period of getting to where the customer, you reach that initial success and the customer is happy, you want to look at your SLOs again and adjust those going forward, because there's always, the customer, that's not a static target. You're always going to want to be tailoring your systems to understand if you're hitting, if your targets are what they're after. And if, because continuous customer happiness is really, as if you're in a business, that's what's going to keep you, engaged and profitable. And personal SLOs, those just lead to a happy life. So thank you. And it's May the 4th, so live long and prosper. Reach out to me with any questions. Thanks.